Welcome to Policing with Pride. I'm Michael Severe. Another edition of us talking about the Papillion Police Department. We're joined in this edition by the Chief, Chris Whitted, and also Sergeant Kathy Matter to talk more about CALEA, which is an incredible accreditation program. Welcome. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, let's start off by, I know you've worked on this. What does CALEA stand for, Chief?
CALEA stands for the Commission on Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies. And basically, it is the gold standard when it comes to law enforcement accreditation around the country. As has been publicized, there's approximately 355 standards that Sergeant Madden and her team have had to corral. But it's more than that. There's probably close to 1,000 standards when you figure in the substandards and the elements of all these different chapters that are in your accreditation book. So it's a very, very time-intensive as well as a thorough examination of your department from top to bottom. We are actually advanced accredited, so there are more standards and more elements of the chapters that we have to abide by and then prove that we actually follow those standards.
Chief mentioned time. When did you guys start working on this particular accreditation? How long did it last?
It started approximately August of 2018, so it's been a 4-year cycle.
Wow.
Of a lot of intense work.
Give me an example of one of the things that you needed to get done in order for this to pass CALEA.
The list is so many, but one of the major things that we had to do is we had to convert from the 5th edition of the CALEA Law Enforcement Standards Manual to the 6th edition, which required a lot of change to our written directives, and we call them general orders. That is the general rules that we follow around the police department. They had to be CALEA compliant. So CALEA went through a series of steps to change a lot of the standards, and that just flows down to all of the agencies, and we have to maintain compliance on those.
In terms of compliance and accountability and those sort of things, they look at everything throughout your department over the course of those 4 years?
They really do. The list is endless. One of the reasons, I'll get to that in a second, but one of the reasons why we actually do accreditation is because it just makes sure that we're following best practices nationwide. It reduces our risk or our exposure to liability when we can prove standards, when we can prove that we are or have adopted best practices and best general orders. When you talk about what is all involved, you're looking at agency jurisdiction, mutual aid, use of force. You're looking at fiscal management and operations of the department, disciplinary procedures, recruitment and selection, training, career development, crime analysts, patrol functions, drug, organized crime, crime prevention, community relations, critical incidents. I mean, the list is kind of endless.
Every aspect of law enforcement.
Yeah, and then advanced accreditation gets deeper into all of those different chapters, they're called. So it really is I'd say a top-down, top to bottom assessment of where you're at as an agency.
What did it mean to you, Sergeant, to be on the team, to be assigned this?
Well, this job isn't for everybody as far as police work in general, but especially being the CALEA Accreditation Manager. The Chief and I have a direct relationship when it comes to CALEA because he is the CEO of our agency and I am the Accreditation Manager of record. In my book, I'm very proud of that distinction, and I take a lot of pride in my work. And although a lot of people might not realize this from our own agency because they're busy in the day-to-day operations, but behind the scenes with the accreditation process and making sure that we can prove that we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing by the standards, it helps everybody out. And even though they might not realize it, but I'm helping to protect the agency from liability and to protect them if they get into any sort of incidents where we may be faced with a lawsuit or some other outside entity or criminal charges. We've come across some of those and we've come out clean on the other side simply because we're following international police standards.
Also, along with the sergeant, more members of the team, if you want to highlight the folks that helped out.
But I couldn't be more proud of Sergeant Matter, Officer Taylor, who's her assistant. He's her training coordinator and assistant accreditation manager. Lieutenant Orchard at the time, now Deputy Chief Orchard. That was the primary team for this last 4-year cycle. So I can't thank them enough for the work they put in. I mean, it's hours and hours of work. But I want to thank all of the men and women of the department, because we have what's called a proof patrol. So we now, as we've gotten into CALEA more and more, we're trying to get more involvement. There's lots of other officers and supervisors that assist us with reports. Sergeant Kurt McClana does a great job. Our patrol officers do a great job of finding proofs for Sergeant Matter and Officer Taylor to, again, show that put into the file. It's a digital file. So it really is a team effort from top to bottom.
Proud that obviously you're accredited this way and advanced too, but we've talked a lot about how you're not trying to win over the public, but convince the public that what you're doing is standard operating procedure, that you're following the rules. When you have this out there, when you have in the front of the building saying that you are accredited by this, you're pretty proud of that?
I think that the citizens of Papillion should know that individuals like Sergeant Matter and her team, myself, my command staff team, we really do want what's best for the community, for this police department, and CALEA really helps in that endeavor. It again gives you those best practices, ensures that you're following standards that a large group of people have put together as the best way to practice our craft. And I think that we do that each and every day, and it's what makes us, I think, one of the most professional departments around.
Pretty much any job has changed over the last 10, 15 years, but how do you make sure that these different changes you were mentioning get passed down to the police officers? They need to know all this, obviously, as well. How does that process work?
Yes, well, our agency initiated the accreditation process in 2009. So we've been in this CALEA cycles continuously since 2009. Each time that there's a CALEA conference, which happens basically 3 times a year, they come out with, from their committees, are recommended changes from either the accreditation managers make recommendations, or there's a change in federal law or state law or something else that changes the standards. When they do that and they vote on it as being an acceptable international practice, then they roll that down to the agencies. So they'll put out a new version of the standards manual, and then each agency is required to comply with those changes. And it could be anything as simple as some language changes, or something very serious post George Floyd, where we had a pretty hefty modification to the law enforcement manual. We all know it as 6.10, and that required several changes, and some of them were required to be immediate changes. We normally have a year to comply with those changes, and that gives us time to really dissect the general order to make sure that it's compliant. Then we conduct a periodic review on all things that aren't CALEA related, so it gives a fresh take on the general order. And then once those get approved by all command staff, then they get rolled out to the staff, and then they review those, and now that's the new rule.
And then you just have individual training with the officers to make sure they're up to date on the new standards?
Absolutely. So first and foremost is their individual review of the general order, and then what typically happens is that their sergeants or their supervisors will do a team meeting and ensure that everybody's understanding of what changed, why it changed, and how we change business.
Interesting. Chief, when you look overall at, obviously you've been in the department for a long time and Chief for a shorter time, how have you seen overall things change? What do you think the biggest change would be that you've seen in terms of law enforcement and policing over these years?
Oh, geez. I think, first of all, just the scrutinization on the job of our performance. Oversight has never been more critical of police, obviously, in light of recent events in the last 4 or 5 years, certainly dating back to Ferguson. Yeah. So there's been a greater cry for transparency than ever before.
Things like body cameras.
Body cameras, and now drones, and again, just overall access to police department and the records, or how officers are disciplined, or review committees that some cities have. Just an overall greater sense of transparency has been the big demand. But I will tell you, and I would tell this to most people, and I would say with a straight face, that policing, in my mind, has never been more professional. There's never been a greater oversight on officers, that they do things well, do things the right way. You're always going to have individual incidents around the country that things may not go the right way or whatnot. But I will tell you that if you polled officers, and they have in past polls, they would tell you that the stress for them more than anything is admin.
Yeah.
Always over, administration, looking over the shoulder, so to speak. So I feel that we have an incredibly professional department, and I feel strongly that CALEA has helped maintain that professionalism and actually accentuated it.
Now that you finish this cycle, do you automatically start working on the next cycle?
Well, it's yes. The short answer is yes, but the bit longer answer is that we are in a process called continuous compliance. Nothing ever stops with CALEA, and we're required to prove at any time that we're following those standards. So right now, we're already into year one of our next cycle. We're 6 months into it. So, and we've been, even though our conference and when we get awarded with our reaccreditation occurs in July, our new year starts in March. So we're already well into it. We're already gathering all sorts of proofs to make sure that we can prove to our assessors that we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing.
CALEA never stops.
Yeah,
it's like recruiting.
It never stops.
I was thinking, like, you finish Papillion Days and you go right to Winter Wonderland. It's like there's no break there. Kind of the same thing with CALEA. It's understandable. Any final things you want to say to folks out there about what this means?
I would. Ever since George Floyd and in the couple years since that incident, there's been a lot of police reform taking place around the country.
Mm-hmm.
Nebraska is no different. They passed LB 51, which had a lot of requirements that agencies in Nebraska need to follow. And as I reviewed that, I realized that we're already doing pretty much all of the things that were that fell within our purview. We're already doing those things. Not only does it require some form of accreditation, it doesn't have to be a CALEA standard, but again, CALEA is the gold standard, so we've already checked that box. There's a lot of general orders or standard operating procedures that need to be implemented. We've already checked that box. So really, because of CALEA and because of the professionalism of past chiefs before me, we've already been doing all those things that are now required of all departments. So CALEA just reaffirms that what we're doing is doing the right thing. And I don't know if Kathy wants to add to that.
Stay in front of the changes. You already worked on this real thing.
Very much so. So when, for instance, when George Floyd came around and all the fallout from that, our policies were already firmly in place, and we only had a negligible amount of things to change, and most of them were language on chokeholds and things to that effect. But one of the things that I'm proud of as being the accreditation manager for this agency is that there are over 220 law enforcement agencies in Nebraska alone. Mm-hmm. And there are, to my last count, I believe there are only 8-ish who have this CALEA accreditation either on the basic level or the advanced level where we're at. Mm-hmm. And so that's a pretty big feather in our cap for not only being part of the CALEA process on a basic level, but going way above and beyond. So I haven't looked at the standards that are required for the Nebraska base level accreditation, but I know that we well surpass it, and I'm very proud of that.
Awesome. Sergeant, we appreciate it. Thanks, Chief.
Appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.